So every Rosh Hashanah, the Torah reading is the same. And not only is it the same, I want to remind you, it's being read in synagogues all over the world. Now, for synagogues that have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, the Akedah is not read till tomorrow. It's the second of the two readings. And the first reading, which is today, if you're in a synagogue where there are 2 days read, is the chapters immediately preceding the Akedah, the chapters that are dealing with Ishmael. And it's very interesting that the way the rabbis set it up in a 2-day service is that the first day is focused on the first son, who has a very different trajectory. But of course, in the Arab world, he becomes the father of the Arab nations. And then the second day is all about then you come to Sarah and Isaac, and ultimately the Akedah being this culminating moment of Abraham becoming the person he is. And year after year, I begin by reminding you of something that's very important for all of us to remember, because by the time we get here from last year, we've forgotten. It's just a story. There's no real God. Nothing about the Torah is about the real God. It's a hint of the real God, whatever the real God. But it's a hint. It is not a newspaper account of what really happened between God and people. And many of us, we grew up where if somebody had said, what's the Torah? We would have said, well, it is we didn't know who the narrator was. It's not clear ever who the voice is in the Torah. But the Torah was presented to us as if this is what really happened. And when God does this, that, or the other things, it's what really happened. And when Abraham bargains with God over whether he will or will not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, that really happened. And when God, was part of that really happened. God, split the sea. And when I was a child in what was euphemistically called Hebrew school, because there was very little Hebrew or school going on. In Hebrew school, Nachshon wasn't part of the story. And even as I'm, if one just came in and knew nothing about the development of the Jewish tradition, and then you hear the prayer book really is a very God-oriented text, as if God is an actor, a character in our lives. And I'm thinking to myself, our Savior and Protector. And by the way, if you read it poetically, it's very beautiful. If you read it literally, it's silly. And if you read the Torah literally, a lot of it is silly. Incidentally, there are parts of it which are so exquisite, it's hard to believe it wasn't written by God. You have to say to yourself, who in the world, what if this is the product? And remember, it's the product not of a person. There is no Shakespeare behind the Torah. It's not in some place somebody sat and decided to create the story of the world being created in 6 days, and on the seventh day God rested, and the story of Adam and Eve. These are oral traditions which have many inputs. And in the end, the entire Torah is a redacted text which happened over hundreds of years, and then one day got written down. And as soon as it got written down, the Jewish tradition started to interpret it. And you can't read the Torah without the Midrash, the rabbinic reading of a text which in its own literal sense is very God-oriented. God is an active character in the Torah story. When you read the Midrash, it is interpreted from a humanistic perspective. By the way, Judaism is not humanism. but Judaism is humanistic. The vision is that it's all about people. And it is the history of how people have sought to end loneliness, create holiness, and in some way respond to whatever human beings sense of the divine in the universe. The Torah is our answer. It's the Jewish people's collective response to something that is a universal experience. The Jews have expressed it through Torah, and more than Torah, Midrash. Because hopefully by now, nobody ever hears about the splitting of the Red Sea without seeing and thinking and feeling of Nachshon. And one shouldn't be able to ever read or feel the Akedah without all the Midrash that go with it. But it's important because the story on its face is so disturbing. It's disturbing because in the text it says that the God of this universe decides to test a parent by asking that parent to give up what is most precious to every single parent, their child. Not only give up, but be the agent of the slay. That's the text. And anybody with a modicum of sensitivity recoils at that notion. And part of the problem is we're not living, 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. We're living today with our sensibilities. And it's impossible for us not to project our own sensibilities back into the text. And for us, it's the start of the story that is so upsetting. And I've talked to you before, we've taken a look at the story, and it's not about the beginning of the story. You understand, the people who wrote the Akedah, they know the ending as they write the beginning. The story is not about the beginning. The story is about how the story ends. And there's a very interesting wrinkle. And I don't know if we've ever discussed this wrinkle before. I want to show you something very interesting. It's all about Abraham, Abraham is a symbolic character. Excuse me. Abraham is a symbolic character in the Torah. Did Abraham really live? Maybe. If Abraham didn't live literally, people like him lived. And he represents the origins of what we become and what, Aaron's descendants just stood here. It comes really from Abraham. If not him personally, you understand, his name is Father of a Nation. If you put a top hat and a little beard, and he said, I want you, it's the Jewish Uncle Sam. But we call him Father Abraham. But most of the time, I don't need to do the Uncle Sam bit. I'm willing to accept the poetic sense there really was an Abraham, whether there was or wasn't. And there was a Sarah. And there was an Isaac and a Jacob. Was there? I don't know. Does it matter? No, it just doesn't matter. Because the power of what they represent in the story they tell is our story. Whether it's an individual, his story, it doesn't matter. Now, see if many of you will know this. The first time we meet Abraham in the Torah, the very first time, what are the first two words said to him? Say it again.
Lech L'Chah.
Lech L'Chah. Do you know that? What's interesting in the Torah is there's no sweet introduction of Abraham. In other words, if someone says, well, what about Moses? Was there an introduction? Yeah. Moses is born, he's a baby, they put him in a basket, he's found by the princess. Yeah, we sort of live with him as he grows up. Not Abraham. The very first thing that's said to Abraham in the text is Lech L'Chah. Lech L'Chah means go forth. Lech L'Chah, go forth from your home, from your homeland, from your father's hand, from all that makes you comfortable in life. Go to a land that I will show you. He's not even told where he's going. Just go. And Abraham goes. That's the way the story begins. And he and Sarah and many other people with him. And by the way, in the Midrash, Terach goes too. It's interesting to see the profound relationship Abraham and Terach have, because very often, again, in Hebrew school, it would sound as if somehow Abraham rejected Terach. Not at all. They all go together to begin an entirely new way of life. Abraham's heroism, the reason he is a heroic figure, along with a character like Ulysses. Abraham is our Ulysses. He's of mythic proportion. Is that what he is doing is establishing an entirely new way of viewing the world, of what he stands for, of what it means to be a good person, whatever one's relationship is with the divine in the universe. He is starting something totally, radically. He is a radical. In my mind, he has a ponytail. And he and his wife set out on a journey that will change the world. The very first words are Lech L'Chah, and they are symbolic of an entire mindset. In some way, by the way, you understand, the Jewish people have been Lech L'Chah for their entire existence. It is not a coincidence that in the forefront of virtually every social movement of the world, certainly of the Western world, there is a significant percentage of Jews that outweigh enormously their numbers in terms of the entire population, the percentage. Jews have been at the forefront of trying to move society forward because it's always been for us Lech L'Chah. That's Abraham's theme. And then we come to the Akedah. And interestingly enough, the exact same two words are there, which we normally don't even notice. Today, I hope you'll notice. Ari reads the first Aliyah. When Ari reads the first Aliyah, you'll hear the words in English. It came to pass after these things. By the way, you understand the Midrash drashes on every word. Achar hadivarim ha'eleh. After these things. And the rabbis ask, what things? The story begins with, and after these things, what things after which? And the Midrash gives the answer. And one of the answers is, Abraham had changed after the birth of Isaac. Until the birth of Isaac, he was a very observant, pious man who always wanted his own son. Then he gets a son. And according to the tradition, he stopped being so pious. He always invited beggars, poor people, to every banquet. He was a very wealthy man, by the way. This guy with a ponytail, very wealthy, very powerful. You know, again, you're talking about 3,000 years ago, so you know, what kind of house did he live in, or what kind of tent did he live in? But if you visited Abraham, you knew you were, in the time, you were dealing with wealth. He was wealthy, he was powerful, he had an army. He was a king. And when Isaac is born, he has a seudah, a party. And for the first time, he doesn't remember to invite the poor. And in the Midrash, this puckish angel named Satan, who becomes Satan in Christianity, Satan, who's always needling God in the Midrash. You know, by the way, there is no Satan, just as there is no God, in the way I'm talking. So Satan says to God, you see, Abraham only was, praying to you when he wanted something. People only care about you when they need. When things are going well, people don't care about you. Interesting how perceptive the Midrash is. And so it was after these things that God did, the English says prove, it's the Old English, test. Nisa, that God did test Abraham. And God says to Abraham, Avraham, and he answers, Hineni. Oh, fabulous word, but I'm not doing it today. And God says, take now thy son. And the Midrash has this as a dialogue between God and Abraham. So when God says to Abraham in the text, take now thy son, Abraham says, which son? Remember, he has two sons. He already has Ishmael. Take now thy son. Which son? And then God says, thine only son. And Abraham says, I got two. Whom thou lovest. Abraham says, I love them both. And then God says, Isaac. Abraham knows where it's going. God knows where it's going. But in the Midrash, it's all spelled out. Isaac, whom thou lovest. And then it says, Lech L'Chah. You'll hear Ari read it. After the word Yitzchak. Asher ahavta et Yitzchak, v'lech lecha el eretz ha-Moriah. You will go to the land of Moriah. You will Lech L'Chah all over again. All over again. You begin anew. And you'll go with Isaac. And you will express a commitment not to death, but to life that has never been expressed before. And we've talked about it before. I just remind you, in the day that this is talking about, when it was written, there were people who believed in the core of their goodness that to in some way make the God of the universe happy, who was a very mechanical, mechanistic, personal God, who decided if you had rain, and who decided if we were healthy or if we were poor, whether we could withstand an army's assault or not. God did it all. And you had to stay on God's good side. And there were people who thought the way you did that was whatever you had. Whatever you had. The first of it went to God. The first fruits went to God. The first sheep went to God. Going to God, what's that mean? You took it to the temple. And if it was a sheep, you would kill the sheep would be slaughtered, and the priest could eat. But it wasn't just your fruit, and it wasn't just your sheep. As inhuman as it sounds and feels, there were people who believed the way you kept God happy was you also literally sacrificed your firstborn child. And you had to bring your firstborn child to the altar. That was the notion that this book was written in. That was the time. And then there's a story. God says to Abraham, Lech L'Chah all over again. The story ends, and by now it should be just second nature to every one of us. The story ends where the sacrifice does not happen. It's happening all around, but it doesn't happen at Moriah. And it's not Abraham who stops it. It is God, God's self in the story, who says, don't do it. I don't need it. All I need from now forever is you never sacrifice your son. You just are so committed to a worldview of creating a world of harmony, of peace, of openness, of understanding, of tolerance, of sweetness. You are so committed to this that you will also commit your children to it as well. And you will teach them. Vishinantam levanecha. We say it every time we say the Shema. Vishinantam levanecha. I love, love, love those two words. Shinantam, by the way, comes from the word not only to teach, but to teach over and over and over again. The idea of repeating and repeating the lesson, because that's the way people learn. Very few of us hear it once and that's it. It needs to be done over and over. The same idea has to be over and over until it becomes part of one's soul. Vishinantam levanecha. You shall teach them diligently unto your children. The word diligently is an English translation. What it really means is you shall teach that over and over, levanecha, to your children. And God says at the Akedah, you don't ever sacrifice a child with a knife any longer. But you commit your children to a way of life, to a Lech L'Chah. And what's interesting is, and you'll hear this in the story, that the entire sub-theme of the story is, there's a refrain. The refrain of the story is that Abraham and Isaac went together. Together. And I've told you before, in the Midrash, Isaac is the real hero. Isaac is not 12 or 13. He's 37 years old or 40 years old. At any time, Isaac could have said, this is ludicrous, and walked away. But Isaac doesn't. Because 2 generations are Lech L'Chah together. Neither one to sacrifice literally on an altar. The story ends, there's no sacrifice. Instead, a ram is sacrificed, and later, Brian and Ken will actually play from the ram's horn that was at the Akedah. Which is very interesting because they use it in antelopes. But you understand symbolically, that's how the Jewish tradition works. When you see Ken and Brian blowing shofar, we are to see the ram's horn from the Akedah. And the call of the Akedah is, you will Lech L'Chah without ever slaying a child ever again. It will never, ever be that that's how you worship God. But what you will do is, you will shinantam levanecha with your children and your grandchildren, and all of you will walk together with Lech L'Chah, creating a new world, a new vision, a new way of doing what's right for people. How do you create a lovely, wonderful world for us and for our nation and for the Jewish people and for all humanity? And what does it mean to hold a child's hand? Not a child who's 13, an adult child and walk shoulder to shoulder? What does it mean to walk with a friend, to Lech L'Chah, to a new world? You see something that is unjust, even if it feels uncomfortable. We live with it, we struggle with it, and ultimately, it's all about people. And so when we read the Akedah, understand you're reading the story of an extraordinary, heroic, mythic figure in a prose poem. There's no God who ever said to Abraham, go to Moriah. It was a story that comes out of our people's experience that has a point. And the point of the story is what's most precious to everybody is the people they love. If you're a parent, it's a child. If you're not a parent, it's some other person you love with all your heart and all your soul and all your might. And you never want to sacrifice them. And you should never ask to sacrifice them. And you're not. But instead, you're asked to go hand in hand together, Lech L'Chahing through life, making life sweeter and better and revolutionizing the way people understand the world. That's the Akedah. It is the most by the way, it feels very uncomfortable till you understand it. Then it becomes a story that soars. This is a soaring story of exaltation and of human aspiration and of having the ability to break through, revolutionizing ways that make life sweeter and lovelier and more good for everyone. And as we read the Akedah today, and you hear Ari read Lech L'Chah, somehow, it's not fair to you because you haven't prepared it that way, but if you can get to the words, and you somehow pause for a moment, Lech L'Chah, so we all feel it. It's our story. You understand, by the way, everyone in this room, you're Abraham. We're Abraham. When we read a Torah story, we're to feel it's about us. This is our story. It is your story. When Ari reads Lech L'Chah, he's talking about you. And I'll say this again, there are so many people in this room who've been part of Lech L'Chahs your entire life. In that spirit, we read Lech L'Chah this morning. And we all say, Amen.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.